Good evening, everyone. Come on in. Good to have you with us on another beautiful November night here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Hello, Jordan. Good to have you on. And Caleb March. Yes, indeed. Jenny is on. And Lisa and Glenda Earl is in St. John's. Dulcie is on. Olive Gidge. Hello, Paul Simpson. Thank you for that. I'm glad you liked that bit of piano. Donna Bercy is on. Good evening to you. Lesson Marg around PEI again. Elwyn Stacy is on via Facebook. Hello, Gloria. Alvin Grimes is out in Pasadena. Gloria Perry is on. Roddy Party is on. Nina Hall is on in PEI. Barbara's got her toes tapping. That's good. Viola's on. My dear Aunt Florence is on. Happy 82nd birthday to you. Aunt Florence had a birthday this week. My Aunt Rita Taylor is on out in Nova Scotia. Good to have you on. Verna's on. Audrey is on. We have Maxine and Bob. Good to have you on. Matthew Pittman. Thank you, Linda. Dave and Kirsty are on. Hello, Faith O'Coin. I hope you're doing just great. Good to have you with us as always. Let's see. Justin Parsons, good to have you on. Tanya's out in Lloyd. Dana Burt, good to have you on. Danny, no boy, it's not much like November, is it? That's because I ordered a skidoo. So you may see no snow this year at all. Wouldn't surprise me. Martin, hello. Good evening to you, Martin. And Martin is inadvertently there referring to me as Shakespeare. Hello, Viola. Good to have you on. And Marilyn Woodford, great to have you on. Sherry and Lawrence and Crystal. Elsie and Don are on. Verna, Bill and Gail Wells. Thanks for that, Barb. Colby Pike. Hello, Lorna and Peggy Stacy. Nina Kennedy. Angela Lawrence out in Port aux Basques. Sharon is on. And Patsy and Angela and Joan. Justin Parsons watching from St. John's. Yes, poor soul living in there. Nothing in there, Justin, but vanity and vexation of spirit. Except for the staff you're with. They're phenomenal. Lonnie is on. Yvonne Marshall's out in Calgary. Madeline's in Loon Bay. Ina's in Gander. Lori is on. Amy Richards is on. Amy got her popcorn. Bonnie and Margot. Carol is on. Hello, Carol. I hope you're doing well. Tina, Marjorie is on. Craig, Faye is out in Pasadena. Carol is on. Colleen and Wayne are out in Deer Lake. Good to have you on. Paul Bradbury, good evening to you, my friend. Shirley and Mike, Karen Huckster, Tiffany, here in Brampton, snowing in Brampton, and none in Newfoundland. These are signs of the end times. Should have included it in my Revelation series. Judy and Paul are in Botwood. Good evening, Dr. Brian Stiller. Good to have you on, my friend. Brian was responsible for hiring me to work at Tyndale, for which I am, I must say, eternally grateful, Brian. Enid is on. Dwight is here to chew bubblegum and cause trouble and I'm all out of gum. Well, Dwight, you better go find some more gum, my buddy. Wilson, Winona, and Candace. Well, Wilson and Winona and Candace, great to have you on. Wilson, I'm glad you had the good sense to reach out to Candace because she is a fantastic young pastor, as I'm sure you've discovered. Hello, Alfred. Good to have you on. Keith King is on. June is on. Christina Burt. Lena's in Lloyd. Christina's in Glenwood. Yvonne says 15 degrees here today in Calgary. Bright sunshine. Yeah, well, it wouldn't 15 here today, I can tell you now. Reach out, folks, and invite some friends in if you think they might be interested in our topics tonight. There's a good time to stop and share to your Facebook page if you're comfortable to do that. If you're not, that's perfectly fine. We have Barb Burton on in Nova Scotia. Roberta and Keith are on in snowy Dunsford. I am back on the rock. Yeah, I was in Ontario last week, but I'm back here now in Newfoundland. Dan Ellsworth is on. Good to have you on, Dan. We have some guests joining us in a bit. I'm going to host a panel tonight of very distinguished and extinguished friends of mine. And I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Very much looking forward to it. We'll wait another couple of minutes for folks to get on. Keep coming in. Sharon Morgan is on in Brampton. Kelly Lander is on in Georges Brook. James is going to be here with us in a minute. Pauline is in Springdale. Keith Young is coming to us from Lloydminster. Good to have you on, Keith. Good to have Elaine on. Jason Rousel is on out in Wabush. We're seeing some interesting days ahead again, I think. The media is making much of this new variant, Omicron. This is, I must say, one of the times when it has been useful to have Greek. Only in the sense that when I just know the letters of the Greek alphabet are as they keep crawling up. So we are now at Omicron. The last one of significant note was Delta. So now we are at Omicron. It's going to be interesting to see how that turns out for us all, for sure. Good to have, where did I start? Jason Rousel is in Wabush. Mara Bowers is down where my mother is in Zephyr Hills. Hope you're having a good day down there. Audrey Humphreys is on. Tammy is on in Stephenville. Sandra is on in Lead Cove. Hillary is on. Russ Austin, the distinguished Russ Austin, is on in Goose Bay. Janice Brown, friends of our family in Pennsylvania. Yes, indeed. Jamie Warren is on, the Bishop of Marystown. Good to have you on. Stephen Carla, looking forward to Omega, the Alpha and the Omega. Yes, for sure. Okay, let me see. So I'll get started now. Folks are going to keep coming in over the next while. I have to send a quick note here. We got a couple of guests are going to be late because they're finishing up church duties. Give me 1 second, folks. So let me start off with the why we do a topic like this and a panel discussion. I've long been committed to talking about things that are either not communicated well or calmly or rationally, or are kind of pushed to one side and conversation is discouraged. And so while I'm aware this is a very hot topic, the whole COVID situation and the church situation, I really think it's worth some serious discussion, and hence I'm committed to doing that. So that's really why I bring up these kinds of topics. Certainly not for my health, but I think something like the whole situation surrounding COVID and vaccines and restrictions, especially as pertains to church, is really worth talking about. And so we're going to do that tonight. I wanted to say off the top, this is not your place to receive medical advice. I have intentionally stayed away from direct medical advice. I think there are other good sources for that, and it's really out of my wheelhouse. So I'd encourage you in the sense that what we're going to do here tonight is primarily theological, maybe some philosophical reflection, some moral reflection, ethical reflection, but generally not, this generally won't be medical as such. I will, however, from my own perspective, and this is just as an individual, not speaking on behalf of anybody or anything, and certainly not trained in medicine, where I kind of came down on the vaccines themselves was, I'm aware that everything seemed pretty rushed, but for me personally, I did a bit of reading from what I consider to be reliable resources, and I kind of concluded that while the particular application to this pandemic was new, the development of vaccines like this had been in the hopper for quite a while. It was just applied now to this particular issue. So I didn't really feel it was rushed as many did. I do think it shows what happens when the wealthy nations of the world put their mind together. You saw a concerted effort, and you saw a situation where there were no holds barred, or no, what was it they say? Money is no object. And money was no object when it came to finding a vaccine for this virus. And kind of makes you wonder what the wealthy nations of the world could have done many, many years ago with things that affect other parts of the world, like malaria, for example. But they put their heads together. They certainly threw a lot of money on the table, and we had vaccines fairly quickly. I have had personally, and again, this is not medical advice as such, but I've personally had some pretty grave concerns with how this has spun out, especially in recent months. It seems to me that there has been a fairly concerted effort to stifle debate in some circles. I'm a little bit concerned that we are not hearing from all of the medical voices that we probably should be. It always seems to me, you see, that if you have got the truth, then you ought not stifle debate, because the truth should stand on its own. When you've got to shut down dissenting voices, that usually signals to me that you're not as confident in your stance as you might have otherwise been. Because if you're confident, you don't need to stifle any dissenting voices. From what I can tell, it seems that there's a pretty concerted effort to present the sunnier side of the vaccines. We are getting reports on contraindications. We're getting some reports on people having reactions. And the media has covered some of this, but in general, it seems to be a pretty concerted effort to be positive about that. I think the whole issue of passports, and that's to say that you got to provide proof of vaccination. It's a bit of a different step. We've had to have proof of vaccination before in this country to live in dorm rooms, for example. We've had to have proof of vaccination to work in hospitals. But the idea now that you have to have proof of vaccination to eat in restaurants, proof of vaccinations in Newfoundland in particular to attend church, that's a bit of a new step. And I have to confess, I find that a little bit troubling, especially when you're in a province like ours where you have a vaccination rate that's now in the 90 percentile. You see, folks, the bedrock of medical decision-making in this country has always been informed consent. And that is to say, you are informed and then you give consent about what medical decisions you make. And I think the challenge we're having here is there is still consent required. In other words, you're not being mandated by law, but the restrictions are set up such that it's very difficult for some people who are working or folks who want to live what would ordinarily be considered normal lives to avoid getting vaccinated. So it's still not foisted upon you, as it were, but to avoid it is now a bit of a challenge for many, many people. The problem with informed consent is that it seems to me that on this issue in particular, which is a little different than other issues, we're having a little trouble with trust. And I do understand that. It's because we are ourselves, as I pointed out on an earlier show, we're not really able to read epidemiology reports. So we're kind of having to decide who we trust to tell us the truth. The medical community is largely lined up on one side. The media has been largely supportive of them. And so that's the natural inclination for most folks, and I certainly get that. You are getting some dissenting voices come through. And of course, the way this has been handled, and I must say it does appear there is some heavy-handedness on the part of both churches, or government primarily, but then churches and other organizations, there's been some heavy-handedness that I think are causing folks some uneasiness. Because again, the less you regulate medical decisions in some ways, the better. In other words, present your case, make it compelling, and allow folks to choose based on informed consent seems to be the best approach. Another point here before I bring our guests on. So this is largely a trust issue. It really is, because when it comes down to this, people talk about doing research, but see, you shouldn't get your research from YouTube or shows like this, especially in the medical sense. This should just help you think about issues. Actual research on viruses and on vaccines is basically beyond the grasp of most of us. So then you have to choose what experts or so-called experts you're going to trust. And that's really, it seems to me, at the heart of a lot of this. For context, for those of you who are not in the lovely province of Newfoundland, we have right now, in terms of our churches, two options. Churches either have to secure proof of vaccination via a vaccine passport to allow participants in our gatherings, or until December the 17th, you may choose what is called option B, which means you don't have to have proof of vaccination, but then there are pretty severe restrictions. You have to pre-register, you have to stay entirely masked, you're not allowed to sing, you operate at 50% capacity. And so the denomination, at least that I'm a part of, has mandated that after December the 17th, all churches must show vaccine passports for attendance. This is causing folks no shortage of grief, at least in some circles. And it seems to me that, so you have those two options. December 17th, by the way, is when the provincial government has decided that public employees have to be vaccinated. The churches have had two competing principles, and this is how I'll set up our panel, which I'll invite to the screen shortly. The two competing principles are, we're trying to, on the one hand, show love for our neighbor. We're trying to be gracious. We are trying to be good citizens and cooperate with public health and undo some of the probably more negative press that we've received in the last 50 years by cooperating and not being so isolationist. On the other hand, we have the whole idea that the church is not a business, and the church is not, this is not like running a restaurant or anything else. We are primarily spiritual in focus. Our primary allegiance is to the kingdom of God, not to the kingdom of humanity. And so that's our competing principles. So if you're wondering where the churches are stuck, this is kind of where they're stuck. Are we going to try to cooperate, be good citizens, trust the science, trust our public health, these types of things? Or have the restrictions at this point become so onerous? Are they crossing the line to where civil disobedience is becoming an option because they're asking us to do things that really are challenging for our understanding of the gospel and the practice of our faith? So that's kind of where we are. So I think that's the two competing principles we are seeing here. Hello to a few more. Let's see. Gail Simpson is on. Gail and Paul, good to have you on. Perry and Judy Ellis. Thank you for this, Amy. I work very hard at being a peaceful and rational voice, so that's good. Thank you. Harry and Betty are on. Amy, might be worthwhile pointing out the difference in scholarly reading. Yeah, there are all sources on the internet, folks. They're not the same, and some are more credible than others. The problem we're having is that the sources that have long been considered credible are now being questioned in some circles. And I'll probably get back to that now in a minute. Thank you for that, Amy. Hello, Catherine is on. Good that you got on. She was looking a little while ago at how to get on. Hi, Pauline. Thank you, yes, Cyril, indeed. Wealthy nations could certainly do much, much more. Junior is on, Gerald is on, Carol Ann, Dwight, Amy, good. It's not altogether new. There's always been occupations require vaccination. The part that's new with this one is for a job you already have instead of a job you don't yet have. That's true. Folks are losing their job. And what seems really interesting is folks are losing their jobs in healthcare when we're desperately in need of more workers in healthcare. So, Tony Orm, Sherilyn Noble is on. Okay, let me admit to the screen our distinguished and extinguished guests. Let me see. Welcome, Crystal and Jared and David, Stephen Grimes, Andrew Holm, James Lander, Taylor Anstey. We may have some more show up yet. I sent some invites out across. How's everybody doing? Good. Let's start with the question that Amy raised earlier.
Good.
Everybody's good? That's good. I know some of you are coming for, some of you are coming from church tonight, and it's been a long day for you, so I appreciate you being on. Why don't we start off and comment on the crisis of credibility that we're seeing, in the sense that the sources that would have been once considered credible sources, so the media, for example, many people for years trusted Knowlton Nash or Peter Mansbridge to tell them the news, or they trusted the three in the US. And now the sources that were once considered credible are no longer considered credible. And so we have a credibility issue in terms of getting our information. And this has direct implications for the church, of course, too, when it comes to credibility. Why do you think we're having this kind of credibility challenge now? What do you think this is all about? Either one of you can jump in.
You want to talk about the opportunity that is afforded in COVID when the world was shut down and the only way you had access was through the ocean of information that is the internet. Anybody who had any stance, any hill they wanted to die on, they had to push that much harder against the competition. So you see what used to be a household name for CNN versus Fox News versus whatever in American pieces in particular, that in order to beat the hundreds of thousands of websites you could find your news, they had to be first, even if they weren't exactly correct. They had to be loudest, even if they weren't exactly well represented. And I find you want to say the squeaky wheel gets the grease. That's not left to the common man. That's also even the media outlet. I feel like whoever says it loudest first. That's right. That's why everyone's been pushing so hard. You asked a question not too long ago in one of our writings on what surprised me the most. My answer was to the extremes people seem to be going to in any level of discipline. Right? That's what surprised me.
Good. Thanks for that. Somebody else, what do you think's going on with our credibility challenge?
Yeah, along the lines of what Jared's saying, this is the whole clickbait issue. We've been seeing this trend for so long, but it's definitely been escalated in recent years. And so while it's been a part of what has been controlling news media the last little while, you're definitely seeing more and more of it now. And so you can create a headline that, sends people over to clicks and gets you advertising money and traffic on your website. But then, your clickbait may not even be entirely relevant to the issue at hand in the article that you're presenting. And so we're seeing a whole lot of that. We're seeing people buying into extreme stories because that's what is going to drive this sense of fear and entertainment that people are so desiring. So it's unfortunate, but it's business.
Good. Anybody else on that question? Because this loss of authority and challenge in terms of credibility, folks don't know who to believe or who to trust, has direct implications for the church too. This is an issue much bigger than COVID. This has been brewing since what we might call postmodernity has been coming down the pike 35 years ago. A loss of institutional trust, a loss of trust in authority, except now we're seeing it spill over not just from, say, politicians, which have always ranked low, to major financial corporations, which have always ranked low. Now it's affecting the church directly. It's affecting and our medical community directly. But that's kind of new. So we're kind of suffering from the same thing here as the medical community is right now, in the sense that folks are less inclined to trust spiritual leaders as well. Any more thoughts on that from either one of you?
I think a lot of it has to do with the amount of information that is out there that's available to people, that they can, before you trusted in the people that had studied in certain things, you trusted in your doctors, you trusted in your pastor or the teachers. Now anybody can access any type of information that they want. It's freely available. It doesn't matter how credible it is. And when somebody comes across information that looks good to them, they'll be more apt to believe that, just because the information is out there. And everybody becomes an expert on everything. So,
Right.
The pastor is not right when he's in the pulpit, and so he gets told throughout the week, what you said was wrong because I heard this guy on YouTube say it this way, or, the doctors are wrong because we've heard it a certain way. So, oddly enough, the amount of information that is out there has added to the lack of credibility that's out there as well.
A few thoughts here. Jonathan Rogers says, is it credibility or a different point of view that is not allowed? There's some of that, Jonathan, for sure. But you can pretty well now, with the click of a mouse, find any point of view you want. The right from one extreme to the other. The problem is determining which are credible. You can find it all. Russ Austin, seems different media outlets follow different political figures and parties. Many messages that media portray are a direct result of the messages that certain political parties portray. That's true. Our media now is probably more skewed politically than it ever has been. Amy is pointing out that the echo chamber, let me see, is this better? No, this is better. That the echo chamber certainly exists. So the more you click on a particular viewpoint, the more you will be shown that viewpoint. So that's something to be aware of. Eventually, everything in your feed matches what you have been looking at. That's the way the echo chamber works. Martin, there's a quick answer to that one. Martin, does the Bible contradict itself when it comes to following the law of the land? The scriptures that talk about the law there, Martin, are not the law of the land. They're the Old Testament law, or the legal system that you'll find in the Old Testament to govern the Jewish people. Romans 13:1 is talking there about submission to secular authority. So law there is being used in two very different contexts, my friend. Jordan, this is true. If you don't make a conscious effort to find opposing viewpoints, you'll quickly find yourself on one side or the other. That is true. Jared started off with this, folks. Somebody else, what have you found most surprising in all of this thus far? Because we've been in this about 20 months now, and you're all involved in leadership in some way. What surprised you? Somebody jump in.
Am I working now?
Yeah, you're on.
No. Am I? I think I can hear everyone, but for whatever reason, I'm choppy.
Your picture's glitchy, but your sound is good.
There we go. As long as you can hear me. I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed is how fast the church pivoted. I was actually kind of shocked a little bit. the church isn't known for quickly changing, and maybe I guess they were forced to do so. But I was really impressed by a lot of leaders, a lot of pastors who just said, you know what, we're just going to take this and we're going to run with it and make the best of it. And it wasn't always star quality and stuff like that, but it didn't matter. They were connecting with their people whatever way they could. And it's probably getting more frustrating right now. But I mean, I'm just impressed in general of how well the church has pivoted and continues to pivot. And I think it's a bright future ahead. But apart from all that, and you guys touched on it already, but I jumped out for a second. I think the other thing that surprised me a little bit is that Newfoundland has kind of had a different approach in terms of church faith groups and how they would meet. Even Nova Scotia hasn't put this Vax Pass in their rules for faith-based groups. So it's just interesting how I think I've been surprised by how the government has maybe changed or their view towards the church, especially in Newfoundland. It might be different, and how that intersects with our worlds today, right?
Mm-hmm. Somebody else, what surprised you?
The politics. It feels so peculiar that this brokenness that our world is facing has been so highly politicized. You either stand on one side of the issue or the other. There's no middle territory of care and concern and safety and loving. It's as if you have to be right wing, left wing. And it seems like it's full of toxicity, and it's just painful. It's been hurting the church. It's been hurting society. And so that's what's been really surprising to me. It seems as if every time we turn a corner, it's a major issue politically, and, obviously the kind of politics that kind of seeps its fingers into religion. So that's been stressful and alarming.
Yeah, for sure. You haven't all got to wait for me to invite you every time. Just by all means, just jump in. I know you're able because I know you. What have you been surprised about?
I think for me, the surprising part has come on towards this end of things, where I think for years now, we've been talking about how the church needs to be outside of its walls. It's not necessarily about inviting people in, it's about going out. And then COVID came and really forced us to do that. And we found creative ways of doing it. But now that we're allowed back in our buildings, but yet that's being threatened again, we have a difficulty where really, like, it's if we believe it's supposed to be outside of the walls. And I get the complexities of this vaccine passport. I have family members and friends and all that who can't go to church and stuff because of the vaccine passport, and I get it. But like, if we're supposed to be outside of our walls and thinking outside of it, if Jesus brought the temple outside of the temple and we're supposed to model that, then is our focus too much on, like, oh, they're threatening us from being able to gather in a building, when it should be on, okay, yes, this is another kind of roadblock where we have to get creative here in, okay, how do we now bring Jesus to the unvaccinated in our church? For years we've been talking about bringing Jesus to the unchurched. So, okay, how do we bring Jesus to the unvaccinated unchurched and the unvaccinated church? Right? So like I get the tension here, and that, like, it is bringing difficulties for people, but it's also like, okay, this is just another thing where the church has to be creative here, and we got to sit down and figure this out. And Mosaic is the same thing. I mean, we're very lucky where we have a demographic where they attend MUN, so they have to be vaccinated, but there are a few who aren't. And so we as a church got to figure out, okay, how are we going to pastor that group of people? How are we going to pastor the unvaccinated students that are in our area? And so I think you got to keep this focus of, yes, I get Sunday gathering is important and being in together in community, but our purpose is supposed to be on mission. And so this is just another part of that. And so how do we do that well, right?
Let's see. Tiffany shares my thoughts tonight. Tiffany is surprised at how quiet everyone is when she's witnessed quite the opposite on previous nights. I don't know if they're all tired or if they got their vaccinations and now it's changed their personalities or what the trouble is. Nathaniel, one of the biggest challenges for Christian is their need to engage in critical thinking while refraining from emotive arguments. That's certainly true. Dwight says, what's surprising to me is how this pandemic has really brought to light people's characters, good and bad. There is no doubt about that for sure. Let me see. Talk to me about what's been the most challenging part of this season for you, and then we'll get into some of the theology.
Steve had made a great point on we finally had the push to make the church a visible practice outside of the building. But in COVID in particular, if it was any other kind of crises and not one that's a communicable disease, let's say, right? If it was a power outage, if it was a mass, if we blacklisted the practice of Christianity or owning a Bible, if this was Fahrenheit 451 instead of contagion, like an underground church is not at risk of literally killing those that it evangelizes in secret outside of their own conviction of faith. So hospitality has been the biggest challenge when you can't make contact for me. It's very difficult for me to find the means to demonstrate love when I cannot physically engage, or I shouldn't at least. And the walls aren't necessarily the challenge there. It's if I had to do this as an underground church, but you being present in my home when we were doing faith in secret did not risk your well-being just because of your presence, whether you agreed to the convictions of faith or not. Like, that's the newest and the strangest challenge for me. Of all things, hospitality is probably one of the hardest things to do when it's a communicable disease.
Right.
Yeah, just to touch on what Steve said there as well, we're really creatures of comfort when it comes to church. So we were all forced out of our churches 20 months ago when COVID originally hit. And as Andrew said, we adapted well to going online and to doing what we needed to do. Then as we were allowed back in, a lot of us just slipped right back into what we were doing pre-COVID, just with the added restrictions. And so, we were online when COVID started, and we were all saying, it's okay, we can do church like this, because it's not about meeting in a building, and we can worship the Lord together in our living rooms, in our pajamas, and still get fed through the word. Then once we got back to church, we just fit right back into the old routine again. And then we got hit with these new restrictions. Now we had to divide our people up, and so now we're conflicted. And that's really hit us hard, because we're back in the building now, and we were comfortable back in the building. And now that we're back in the building, we don't want to divide everybody up. And this is where, not to jump ahead into the theology part, but this is where our ecclesiology is really messed up sometimes, because we've gone back to, it's all about the building. It's all Sunday heavy, because this is all about doing church on Sunday, when really the church is more than just in the building for a couple of hours on Sunday. And that's the challenge. That's to me right now in this season, it's the challenge of, now that everybody's comfortable back in the building again, how can we kind of even go back to what we were trying to do 20 months ago when all this hit, and we were saying it doesn't have to be about the building, and everybody wants it to be about the building again.
Right. Ecclesiology, by the way, folks, is your understanding of what the church means. What does it, what is your theology of the church? What's your doctrine of the church? How do you understand we are supposed to gather and to practice and all of these types of things? Let me take a moment now, since I never did it earlier. Andrew's having some technical trouble, so he pops in and out. Why don't you take a moment just to say, tell the folks where you're currently located and how you spend your time. What are you doing with your life? Crystal, why don't you start?
Hey, Crystal Card. I am youth and young adult pastor at Bethesda Church here in St. John's, Newfoundland.
Jared.
I'm Jared Noble. I have the pleasure of serving as the Next Gen Outreach Pastor in Stephenville on the West Coast.
Yes, sir. Brother Kenty.
My name's David, and I'm currently in Mount Pearl, and I teach for Tyndale, for Queens, Tyndale University and Queens College, and do a little bit of media work on the side. So that's what I'm doing right now. Oh, and I was also in pastoral ministry for 7 years before I came here. So,
Right. Andrew?
My name is Andrew Holm, and I'm tech support. No, we're trying to do a few things, new things, new launch this week, and look for new opportunities. And so, yeah, hopefully this is going to work. I made a few changes. Hopefully that'll work now, but it doesn't look like it.
It's working a little better by the look of it to me.
Well, I'll try one more thing, and third time's a charm.
Glad to have you on, my friend. Andrew has, next time I'm on, I will get Andrew to join me for a minute if he's willing to talk a little bit about his new initiative. He's trying to help churches and pastors in the area of business. So we'll get him to describe that for us. Taylor.
No problem.
Hey, I'm Taylor. I am the lead pastor at Emmanuel Pentecostal Church, Arnold's Cove, Gooby, Sunnyside, wherever they'll let me in the door. I've been here for 3 and a bit years.
Go for you. James.
James Lander, lead pastor at Emmanuel Pentecostal Church in Georges Brook, Milton. Been here for 4 years now. I'm up to about 20 years full-time ministry, and I am the distinguished graduate student of Dr. Bradley Truman Knoll. He's my thesis advisor.
Yes, I forgot that. That's true. You're doing a good job. And Stephen Grimes.
Yeah, it's Steve. I'm pastor at Mosaic Campus Church and chaplain at Munn, and I get the great honor of being next to James on the screen.
Yes, you do, sir. Student chaplain to Memorial University. Now, folks, let's get into the theology. So we're having let me see. How should we start here? Jamie is telling us we're talking about how to live in a time of government overreach. He points out that Jesus, the disciples in the early church, all lived in a time of government overreach. They modeled for us how we should respond. The main question, as you know, is this one. What would Jesus do if he was in this situation? So I'll frame it to you like this. Can you imagine Jesus? We'll start with this on the theological piece. Can you imagine Jesus standing at the entrance of a worship gathering, turning folks away? Because that is kind of, for many, the crux of what's going on. If you enforce the vaccine passport, as we've been asked to by some of the denominations at least, and by the provincial government here in Newfoundland, then you're essentially telling folks, if you're not vaccinated, you're not welcomed here in among this gathering. And folks can't really imagine Jesus doing that, and yet many of us are having to do so. Would you, one of you or all of you, like to take that on? Because that seems to be a key point.
There's a question there. It's also written in by Donna Bursey that says, I keep hearing the church anti-vaxxers saying Jesus didn't turn away lepers, but did he bring those inflicted in amongst those who were not? Now, maybe because I did nursing before I was a pastor, maybe because there is a unique challenge in next gen ministry because of the inability for youth and children in particular to have medical autonomy. If their parents say no, they can't say yes for a number of these challenges, right? So this one hurts if it's not delivered properly. And I want to address this while I have everyone here. Unvaxxed is not infected. We are not treating people who do not have this yet as though they are going to, by their presence alone. Anyway, the leprosy piece is wonderful because it was the first thing that was brought to me when my father and I, of all people, had the conversation about how we approached this crisis in particular. And my theological approach to this would be out of Mark 1. I can't imagine Jesus turning somebody away from the opportunity to worship based on an affliction that they already had. And I can picture him telling them, and this is really hard for me to say this, I can picture him telling them for their own benefit, because he did this with 10 lepers, when he had healed them, to go and show yourselves to the priests and make your offering. Go show yourselves to those who have the authority to tell you that you are now capable of joining into the institution of worship. And some of you who are watching are going to write me off for saying this. I am fully vaccinated, and I am fully against the employ of the vaccine passport in its purpose, because exclusion to me does not coincide with the operation of faith. But anybody who is following after Jesus needs to be willing to lay down their life. So if you're going to say you're willing to take a bullet for your neighbor, you're willing to lay down your life for your Christ, you're not willing to get a needle to protect someone else's mother, it hurts me. It hurts me to see the disconnect. And I am trying to tell you this with as much love as I can provide. The vaccine passport makes no sense to me. But in the operation of love for your neighbor, 100% I can see how Jesus would approach this.
Okay, jump in, folks.
I'm gonna be that guy, and
Steve.
Yeah, I know, but like I feel like there's a question that needs to be answered first: is would Jesus be even at the doors of our worship gatherings?
Right?
No, so like I know, I'm being that guy, but it goes back to our view of ecclesiology, and like I saw a comment there earlier that said, yes, it's great to go outside our walls and build relationship with people and share Jesus, but then we get to a point where they need to be ingrained in a church, but they can't come to ours because we got to scan vaccine passports. But like, is that the goal in our ecclesiology, right? Like, is the goal for them to be able to come on Sunday? Right. And I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm being that guy to ask, like, would Jesus actually be there or would he not? So that's my first thought and question.
We'd be one day late because he was there on Saturday. But maybe you guys can help me on this one. I don't mean to hijack this one, Pastor Brad. To come back to the thought about taking the church outside of the walls, does it mean that we have to abandon the opportunity as well? Because everywhere else when it comes to the vaccine passport or how this conversation is going is either a pay to play or a essential service. And we are not classified as an essential service. So you're not allowed to demonstrate hospitality in your home with people outside of your family group. You're not allowed to attend a restaurant without a vaccine passport. For all of the other means, if they're marginalized, if they're poor, who Jesus asks us to reach out to the poor, to see them in prison, right? I don't know many other opportunities than the use of a local church, which should not have an admission fee, and in my experience and conviction, should not have any restrictions at the door. Like, what alternatives are we offering that say that we can leave Sunday aside or the practice of the church aside because this will work? I genuinely need the alternatives to make sense to this.
I'm glad Steve decided to be that guy before I decided to be that guy. But yeah, what I was going to say before Jared spoke first there was this idea of Jesus standing at the door turning people away. Jesus' ministry was never limited to the temple or the synagogue. Jesus was kicked out of the synagogue at one particular point. Jesus found an opportunity to minister to whomever, whether it was the leper or the tax collector or whomever, in the countryside, in someone's house, around the table, wherever he was, he found opportunity to minister to them. So again, this goes back to the idea of ministry doesn't have to be limited, and this is where we need to be creative, doesn't have to be limited to the temple or the synagogue or the church building. And if there are people in our communities that can't get out to the church building, then we need to be able to create opportunities for them. When the Vax Pass first came down, we decided to go, as many churches did, with a 2-tier option. So we did our Sunday evening service, which is always our largest attended service. So we do our Sunday evening service with the Vax Pass in place, but we also did our Sunday morning. We do Bible study in the mornings. Sunday morning Bible study, anybody could come. We just had those extra restrictions in place. Of course, we weren't singing in the Bible study as well, so we didn't have that singing restriction on us without the Vax Pass. And so we did the 2-tier approach. Of course, we're not going to be able to do that as of December the 17th, but we wanted to do it in a way that we haven't had to turn everybody away. At least we were giving people the option of coming into something if they wanted to. And beyond December the 17th, we might have to get creative in other ways to try to minister to people.
I think all that's helpful. I keep coming back to the fact that I think we got to go back to submission to authority and where the church is, because I don't know if we get off track when it comes to Vax Passes and the actual decision that we had to make, because Jesus did both. Jesus, I believe, had a submissive nature to him, but he went up against the Pharisees. Like he didn't shy away from that, and he put them in their place several times. But when it came to the authorities, he was very submissive. And Paul takes that in his letters as well. I mean, Paul's in prison later, and I mean, he's not looking for a way out at times. He is writing the letter to the Philippian church, teaching them and using whatever opportunity he has to his disposal. He's not giving up because there's a Vax Pass or there's some sort of restriction on his life. So I think there's a way that we can be submissive and humble as a church, and actually approach these decisions, and they could be yes Vax Pass or no Vax Pass, and I think we can come to a theological agreement that we can do that healthily with, that's not the right word obviously, but with a posture of submission, so that we have the right focus. Because I think what's happening is we either go from a submissive approach, or we go from a protection approach. And one is based out of faith, and one is saying, well, I believe that God is going to care for my needs, and I'm either going to pick that I'm okay with the vaccination, or I'm not okay with the vaccination. But my approach is very much trust in God on both accounts. But if we go from a protection perspective, where we're trying to defend the way we do church, and we're trying to make sure that we have rights and all those things, we go from a fear perspective, and then no matter what we choose at the end, it's going to be problematic. We're either fearing that we're going to spread COVID or get COVID, or we're going to have fear that that there's some sort of conspiracy in place, and it's all based in the wrong kind of posture. So I think the church should be more concerned theologically, more concerned about the posture to which we approach this conversation, as opposed to trying to defend or protect something. Am I being clear there?
Yeah, that's good. Let me see. We see this often from Shane. This comment comes out: Jesus left the 99 and he did to go find the one, but that one was lost. That one wasn't unvaccinated. I'm not sure that works as well. He's talking there about the value of the one over the value of the many. I suppose you could extend that to people who have willingly chosen to remain unvaccinated. Hi, Brian. Lots of silence on the panel. Not a lot of answers to this dilemma, I guess. I think that is some of it. There are no real straightforward answers, which is why I invited some friends here to try to talk it through with me. Faith says, this makes me feel like we're back at Tyndale sitting around the dinner table having the hard conversations. Yeah, we did an awful lot of that at Tyndale. Jamie, addictions groups, mental health groups, food banks are all considered essential and exempt from the Vax Pass. There are many ways to minister to your community. Any of you want to bounce off of that? Because part of the challenge here in Newfoundland is that worship gatherings were considered non-essential. Crystal.
I'm all over this if I can.
Yes, by all means.
So yeah, I don't know if anyone has read N.T. Wright's book, God in the Pandemic. And while we may not agree with all of N.T. Wright's theology, it is an incredible book. He takes us back to the New Testament church and how they dealt with even the plagues of the time. And he allows people to consider a narrative where the church itself rises to the challenges that they are facing and supports the community in the middle of those challenges. And I just want to go on record to say, like, we're not excited about this Vax Pass. I don't think there's any church out there that's enthusiastic about turning people away at the door. But this is the reality that we're facing right now when it comes to our Sunday morning gatherings. And so in line of what N.T. Wright has said and what Jamie is putting forward for us, the church has an opportunity now to consider the needs of our community and our people and rise up in the midst of that and serve them where they are. And so while our Sunday morning gatherings might be limited, we have the opportunity to be Jesus in a really confusing time for our world. And this isn't the first time our world has faced a hurdle. Like, we didn't get the opportunity to live through World War II, World War I. And there are areas in our world who are facing really deep and dark times that, we don't even get an opportunity to see into in our privileged state here in Canada. And so while we are facing this with the heaviness that it is, this isn't the deepest, darkest moment that our world has gone through. I think that we as the church, as Christians, as individuals who love Jesus, need to think about what opportunities do we need to lean into to be the church in our community, as we've been saying here already. Yes, addictions, mental health, and mental health issues, concerns have been skyrocketing because of the drain that this pandemic has put on people, because of the rise of people turning to social media for escape. And it's causing so many issues among youth and adults. And we're going to see it more and more in adults. Adults have a little bit more tenacity than our teenagers, but we're going to see that climb higher and higher. And so how do we as a church serve these people? When we saw these plagues surfacing in the early church, the people went out and cared for the people in the very, very practical ways. And I think that that's what Jesus is calling to us to in these moments. I love our Sunday morning gatherings. There's nothing greater than walking into a room and seeing the people that I pastor and love. That just brings me so much joy and enthusiasm. But at this season, as the church, we need to be thinking about very creative and intentional ways to serve the people where they are in their brokenness, in their fear, in their mental health issues, and in their addictions and in their struggles. And so how do we do that? Part of that may be we need to reimagine how much energy we're putting into Sunday morning. Because I know that as a pastor, we're exhausted. All of us. Like, I don't think there's a pastor out there that's not feeling the stress of every pivot, every change in this season. But we need to think through, how we reorganize our energies to serve our communities where they are. And so, while, yes, this conversation is about Sunday morning and how we serve people at a worship gathering, I think that there's so many other greater needs out there that we need to be serving. And yes, I absolutely cringe and I'm heartbroken at the thought that someone cannot come into a worship service. Yes. But I think our greater need is what is happening out there outside of our services that really needs Jesus to move. And, aren't we his image in these moments?
So do we have a particular theological problem with a Vax Pass?
Everyone says the panel's quiet, and I'm out chewing at the bit, trying not to argue.
Oh, I know, because I know you.
If it's not the Vax Pass in particular, can I reframe the question so it's not, because it's so easy to narrow down two sides of an argument in this kind of culture, okay? It's not necessarily the Vax Pass that is troubling me. It is, I want to look at the entire landscape, the entire public health orders, and I look at 92 point something percent of the island now doubly vaccinated in the original eligibility before they added the 5 to 11, right? Yeah. So you want to talk about leaving the 99. Well, 99 of them are vaccinated for the one that's unvaxxed. I understand the analogy. It doesn't translate well. I understand it. But it's not necessarily the vaccine passport alone that I have a challenge with. I'm confused at, and I don't want to downplay anyone else's suggestions or the good intentions and the kind words you're saying. Creative approaches still at the end of the day require you to make contact with another person. How will they believe if they're not heard? When it comes to preaching to them, we try an online medium. Fine. Our population, 60% of them have an online presence. 40% of them don't. When it comes to our children and youth, you want to talk about the number of people in my church. If there were 140 that used to come to our assembly, our first Sunday reopened, we had 18 people under the age of 12 in the service. Medical autonomy and eligibility for vaccine passports, the last mandate we got from mass gatherings says that the children cannot come to a Sunday mass gathering unless it is a dedicated children's program. Like getting lost in the lines, getting lost between the lines is what worries me. Is we can talk about creative approaches, we can talk about, but if each of these people, if you don't have a name for every single person that I am trying to either reach or find to bring to our Sunday service or reach outside of that Sunday service, it's so easy to get lost in the particulars. That's what I'm worried about. It's not necessarily a passport alone. It's I am not supposed to see more than 20 people when it comes to who can and cannot be part of my household. I am not supposed to stay within 6 feet of someone else. And here I've got someone that wants to come to my office for counseling that I am not supposed to touch, and they're telling me about how they just miscarried. I have children that want to come to our children's programs. Mom and dad, out of their own education, fear, whatever, are not ready for vaccination. They aren't, and the children are not. Until I do a dedicated children's program that allows them under option B, they're not supposed to be in my influence. And here I'm trying to help navigate them between an absolute nightmare. Some of you here are parents. Your children having to wear masks through school all day, that's the least of their concerns. Judah's going to school with 2 grades above him that don't know what it's like to have a group project. They don't know what it's like to interact with their peers, much less have a community of believers. Right? The challenge goes a lot further, a lot wider than trying to polarize your stance on whether you do or don't support a vaccine passport. It's the operation of faith when the public health measures forbid you from gathering. That's the biggest challenge.
That's why I'm asking if there's a theological issue with it, but nobody seems to want to pick me up on the question. Is there a theological issue with having a vax pass? Does that run against our understanding of faith and doctrine? To decline people attendance to a worship gathering for a free will medical choice that they've made? That's what I'm interested in.
I think the answer to that is probably contextual. I get the sense that there are probably churches in Newfoundland that have had a far harder time with implementing the Vax Pass than others. And I think that really depends on where you are. For example, our church, for anybody who doesn't know, Arnold's Cove and area, I have a church about 25 to 35 people. Like most rural churches, it is definitely a senior congregation. We do have some younger people, but it's a lot of seniors. But when the time came to decide how we were going to implement the vaccine passport, I phoned the people in our church to see if they were vaccinated, if they would give me that information and to kind of get a sense of this is what's going on. How do you feel about it? And I was pretty quick to find out that 99% of our congregation was in process of getting vaccinated. So paired that with the fact that we just passed, we did a survey with our church people, and I took the attenders of the church, and out of those attenders that did the survey, 75% of those people said we're ready to just have one service on a Sunday instead of two. And for some of you, that seems like 20 years ago you should have had that conversation, and some of you are still in that wondering what you should do kind of scenario. But so the fact that almost all of my church is in process of getting vaccinated, plus the fact that we're no longer having a night service, which for the Pentecostals means that sort of evangelistic sinner in the back seat sort of scenario is not going to happen anymore. And to be honest, it hasn't happened in the church since I've been here. I mean, I've led people to Jesus. Other people have led people to Jesus. People have become Christians in their home. I've not seen one person since I've come here come to the altar and give their life to Christ at the altar. So for us, I mean, is it a theological issue? I guess so, but I anticipate and I know for a fact that it's a lot weightier in some other contexts for sure. Because they're dealing with lower vaccination rates. You still have that traditional, you have a lot of people that don't know Jesus wanting to come on a Sunday night service and wanting to be a part of that. So for us, it's been a different scenario than I would guess a lot of rural churches in Newfoundland.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on what Taylor said, because she brought it up. And I don't think this is really a theological conversation. I think once we get into the realm of theology, we're beginning to polarize the issue in this sense, because, as you know, theological beliefs are so deeply personal. I think some of our problems have been that we have tried to make this theological in some respects. I look at it more as ethical. And so in this case, your ethics are going to be more subjective based on who you are. So in my understanding, I was just walking through this in my head a little bit ahead of time here, but so what I've heard the discourse, and I've talked to pastors on both sides of the fences. I'm just going to use pastors, not people in the pew, but pastors. That's most of my contacts are. And option A, option B. I think what ends up happening is we, on the option A side, say, well, we're for, the health of our people and we want to keep them healthy. And those option B'ers, they're not trying to do that. They're not acting out of love. And then you have option B'ers saying those option A'ers are not acting out of love because, they're hindering the spirit or whatever the case may be. And I think that from my experience is that all the pastors that I've encountered are in fact operating out of a position of love. That love is subjective. It's based more or less on what is important to them. So if you grow up and church is an essential part of your spirituality, it's going to make sense that you're going to gravitate more towards an option B and see that as more of an act of love than somebody who probably thinks more in sense of the church being more universal and goes option A. And this comes back to the point of view of Christ saying, he comes and he's talking about a lot of theological issues, but he's also giving us ethics. He's also giving us an ethics of the kingdom. And ethics is different than morality. Morality is deciding what is right and what is wrong. Ethics is the attempt to find the greater good within the community itself and within your personal life. And so this is really what Christ gives us. He gives us ethics. He gives us what is going to be the best for us and the best for those around us. And so he comes along and he says things like, love your neighbor as yourself. And so let's just take that concept. So loving my neighbor as myself. I don't know if you know my wife at all, but her love language is getting gifts. My love language is different. And so when I give her something that's not a gift and give her a different love language, I miss the mark completely. And she's upset at me. Well, no, she's not upset at me. She graciously accepts it. But, and the same for me. And there's a misunderstanding happening there. I don't understand why she wants gifts so much because I like love this other way. And so there's this miscommunication. And I think that's really what we're seeing here is that we are seeing each other trying to deal with a very difficult issue. And we're trying to use the ethics Christ gave us, love being the central part of that, love for your neighbor. and we're all kind of approaching it more subjectively. So I don't think we can come to any real theological conclusions that aren't going to be divisive. But I think ethically, we can all say that whether you are A or you are B, or whether you are that third party that just says, scrap it all together, I'm going to go and do whatever the heck I want to do anyways. I think that there is a measure of love at the central part of their decision-making process and love for their congregation. And I think that's really my sort of perspective on it right now.
I think that's fair. I think that everybody is trying to be loving. So some folks are saying, well, the best way to be loving is to follow the public health guidelines, keep everybody as safe as we can, look at creative ways for connecting with the community outside of the Sunday gatherings. And other folks are saying, well, the best way we can be loving is to stand up to government overreach, make sure everybody is welcomed in our Sunday gatherings, and show them that Sunday gatherings are important. So I don't think that there is a lack of love on either side. I think folks, as David points out, are trying to follow the ethics and the teachings of Jesus as best they can. It's just we see this in two different ways, probably. To David's point, I'm not sure I agree there's no theological issue here, and I'm not sure that I agree that just because it's divisive doesn't mean it shouldn't be a theological issue, because many theological issues are divisive because we don't agree on the theology. To frame my question a little more, put a little finer point on it, is there any justification in Scripture for a shepherd of God's flock to turn away people from a Sunday gathering? Because that's what we're doing. And so scripturally, that seems to me, I'll come out and say it, I think the Vax Pass is problematic for us biblically, because we are having a Sunday gathering. The basis of the Scripture, unless you're hardcore Calvinist, is the idea that everybody is welcome to faith. Everybody is welcome to join. Everybody is welcome to worship. And we have a scenario here now where Crystal could meet somebody on a Saturday night in a bar. Not that she goes to a bar, but she went there to lead them to Jesus, and she led them to Jesus, and then cannot invite them to the gathering on Sunday to be discipled because they're not vaccinated. So we can actually reach people in the community, but can't invite them in some cases to come worship with us.
But you're actually locating it all back on the church again. That Sunday morning service. You're saying, well, they can't be discipled. No, but you are. You're saying. I'm not saying
it's all there, but that is certainly a part of it.
Yeah, but you would have to then find a scripture that is a one-for-one correlation with the way our ecclesiology is in the 21st century, and say that is the defining scriptural point. We can say that is a one-for-one translation of what we're experiencing now, because to my knowledge in the New Testament, you're dealing with so many various points of ecclesiology, so many different brands and versions based on whether you're Pauline, you're from James, you're from John, you're from Peter. It doesn't matter. So the argument falls apart because you don't have a one-for-one correlation of a shepherd of a church in the 21st century located in the New Testament. And I think that the access to worship is also a red herring, because we believe as Pentecostals that the Spirit is universal. So I can worship anywhere. At the most we could say is that it's affecting our communal rituals. But even then, that's kind of loose and sketchy, because at the end of the day, Acts has so many various representations of community and communal rituals that you can't define it to one-for-one with anything that we're experiencing now.
I can put one pin in this, Dave, and then maybe you'll be able to retort and make more sense of it. What you're talking about is those who have come to saving faith. The record of the Acts is a record of the growth of the church, those who have already assumed in their hearts that Jesus Christ is Lord and that he's coming again. What I am genuinely concerned about is those who do not know yet, or have not made that conviction of their own. And because of the circumstances that we are in, we want to talk about a creative approach. We may need to, in a creative approach, no different than Acts 16. We're actually going against what the common authority of the land, not the church, is telling us to do. So Acts 16, you want to talk about a precedent for singing when it's not right. Here you have Paul and Peter, Paul and Silas, and they're after making a mess of how the governing body of the city made their money. They're dragged into prison, and there they sing. Like, The ecclesiology there, you want to talk about a creative approach in Acts to worship. They arrived there because they defied the city's authority and the popular opinion. Like, it is a theological issue. It is ecclesiology. Kelly Bean wrote a book called How to Be a Christian Without Going to Church. And Gerald, I got his name gone, wrote a retort, and the Gospel Coalition, one of the most tongue-in-cheek articles I've ever read, says how to learn to swim without getting wet. Like, I don't think that you can't be a Christian without going to church, but I guarantee you it helps. Like, you to be able to be part of a Sunday gathering, be part of a community of believers, to have a routine and a rhythm that has you regularly come back to these emblems and to each other. Like, it's not a non-negotiable for me to have a facility, but it is a non-negotiable for me to have a community, and we happen to meet in a building.
So I'm still not. I think I'll bet Dave a little bit on this one, because the idea of the church and the gathering. Come on now, Brad. You by the way, your boo was delayed, so I didn't get the full effect. So yeah, no, we gather together, but that could be in a small house. I mean, that doesn't necessarily have to be a big church
Exactly.
gathering that they're there. So from a theological perspective,
It's against public health guidelines. Say it. You can say you want to be next, but
Jared, you only care about public health guidelines when you want to care about public health guidelines. That is the bottom line.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
I will keep that segue for later.
So listen now. Even within that, you can still have your 20 most let's be facetious. So from a theological perspective, that's what it is. It's concepts. So you have 20 people that you're constantly in contact with. That's your church. That could easily be your church. So from a theological, I don't see that. The biggest theological perspective, the issue that I see with this is how we're approaching this conversation. Like, if it's all about love, I don't see the polarizing issues happening. The biggest problem I see with this is I don't always see that. I don't see a posture of love. I don't see a posture of submission to each other or having different opinions. I actually see a posture of the opposite, even in the comments. I mean, I know it's tough to hear, and even in this conversation, but there's an argumentative kind of posture here. And I know we can debate, and I get all that too, and I appreciate that as well. But when we are coming from different worlds, and we kind of use that fear-based thing where we're actually drawing from, what if the government takes on more of an overreach, or what if this is just the beginning, or what if, and we go down those roads. I think we're moving away from the posture that Jesus would want us to have anyway, and it really derails all ministry we're trying to do. And at the end of the day, it really concerns me that the Newfoundland government can't trust the church enough to give us some freedom. Like that to me is like, what's going on there? Like, maybe they see something that we don't. And I mean, that to me, that's a growing concern of mine, that, what are we actually telling our governing authorities? Is it the right message? Are we fighting back in the wrong thing sometimes? And to me, the only theological issue is really our approach to this. It's not necessarily, because I think if Jesus was here today, I think he would just change what church looks like. I don't think he would. That's just my thought on it. Whether it's something new or whether it's just completely different. Like, I think he'd be the first one to sign up for how to make life easier for our politicians, or how to reach out to our schools to make life easier for them. He'd be the first one volunteering at a school to make their job easier. Like it just would be different. And I think we're just approaching it maybe in the wrong light. Maybe, I'm not sure. My 2 cents.
I will give you 5 for that.
I was going to bring up the what if scenario too that Andrew was just hitting on. I mean, we keep going back to the what if situation. Right? What if someone comes to your church and they're not vaccinated? You have to turn them away. What if? Reminds me of the classic argument against pacifism. What if an armed man comes into your house and wants to, kill your kids? What are you going to do, right? we always go to that what if scenario, and I'm an overthinker, so I always, want to come up with all these different potential scenarios as well. My experience here on the local level is we haven't had any real opposition towards coming to church without the vax pass. It hasn't created much of a problem for us. And it will be interesting to, get the opinions of other pastors throughout the province, situations that they've had to be in. Not to say that it's not creating problems, but we keep going to this what if. Well, what if somebody gets saved and you have the, you have the opportunity to lead someone to the Lord outside of the church, but they can't come to church on Sunday? Well, okay, we want to disciple them. Yes, they don't have to be discipled on a Sunday morning. Discipleship doesn't have to be limited to Sunday morning. We can do one-on-one mentorship still. That doesn't even have to be done in the same room with somebody. There's ways to mentor people and to disciple people who come to Jesus besides having them come. Again, we don't want to go back to that Sunday morning model. And I'm like Crystal. I'm not against the Sunday morning. I appreciate the Sunday services. I'm not hitting against that. But if our what if is constantly, what if someone comes to Jesus, or what if someone comes to your church and you got to turn them away? That's going to be such a small margin of situations that you're going to find yourself in. We can work around that. We've got a Holy Spirit that leads us and guides us to do ministry. Let's rely on the Holy Spirit to guide us in those scenarios. We don't have a biblical precedence as such as to how to do these things. To go back to what Dave said, we don't have anything to fall back on as such. But we do have a Spirit to lead us in the situation that we find ourselves in. When it comes to this whole situation with the vaccine passport, and Brad, I mentioned this when you first asked me to come out here, I really don't know where I stand on this, because I know the situation on this far end, and I know the situation on this far end, right?
Yeah.
And I find myself somewhere in the middle, struggling with it, because I don't want to have to come to the place where I've got to say to someone on a Sunday, we can't allow you inside, if that ever does happen. But I don't want to be so tore up over that I still can't carry on and minister to the people that are there on a Sunday and are there to worship the Lord and sing. And the reason that they're able to come inside and sing is because they do have their vaccine passport and they're there to worship the Lord. We'll cross these bridges when we come to it, but they're not going to be as many as sometimes we put ourselves out to be. And I like the point that Crystal Patey made there. A lot of the fuss is usually from the church folk and not from the world. If our purpose is to reach out to the world, to minister to the unbelievers, I think the reputation of the church and ministry in the community is going to hinge more on us loving our neighbors through having the vaccine and the vaccine passport and abiding by those rules than it is for us to defy government orders and not to have it. We're going to leave a bad taste in the mouth of the community if we're not abiding by those government mandates rather than not abiding by them. And so if it's our Christian testimony that we're worried about, I think we need to go along the lines of public health safety as opposed to opposing what government is saying just because we want to come inside our church and sing.
Good. Somebody else?
So the last point you had made, James, I want to make sure I don't want to misquote you on this. No. The following of the public health guidelines, making sure that we witness to our community well, operating within those guidelines. Yes? And Dave, bless your soul, you're right. My wife actually just sent me a message after you said it. Dave's not wrong. You didn't care about guidelines at all in year one. You thought this was an absolute farce. I want to be a lot more liberal than I am choosing to behave. I won't lie to you there, but I am choosing to operate. And as you said, James, we are operating inside of government mandates in option B. Yeah. The issue at hand is not necessarily the Sunday morning alone for me. Okay, it's now the practice of faith and worship when it comes to how many can gather, if you can sing. A lot of these.
Oh, and Jared is breaking up. How the Lord intervenes.
See, the Lord just shut him down.
Yeah, because he was disagreeing with Dave. I think this is what happens.
Yep. Yeah, it was when he started disagreeing with Dave, not with me.
Speak
That's
not
what it
against
was.
the Lord's anointed.
Fair enough. I'll shut up.
You're back now.
Oh,
That's
But
the
you're
Lord's
fuzzy.
intervention. That's all that is.
help me where I lost you. Then what did you last hear from me?
In conclusion,
We heard it all.
In conclusion.
we heard it all, yeah, except for the very last bit. It's just your picture was froze.
Okay, that picture of me froze. I'm not worried about that.
Well, it was troubling us.
I am worried that we're going to associate the compliance with one of these two poles with Christian witness, and I don't think that's necessarily where the final authority rests. And maybe that might be part of the conversation, because I am not trying to demonize someone who does not operate the way I do when it comes to how we approach this in the reach of our community. I think there are numerous churches and pastors that would think I'm completely out to lunch that are doing a far greater job reaching the context they've been given to shepherd. But here's my piece. The authority question is one I've seen in our comments, and one that I do need to ask. The reach to which the government has to ask us to behave a certain manner, where is there a line? It's a good question, not where does the line begin, but is there a line to where they are telling us to go against our own creed, against our own practice, our own convictions, where they don't have the authority to say so. They don't have the final say. I'd like to propose that gathering, hospitality, and worship, which includes singing, and even still with your mask or choosing to abstain from that, as I am asking my people to do while they are in our services. If you're watching and you're thinking this is an excuse, don't, okay? But listen to me. If the government has asked us to go beyond their authority, going beyond the final authority of Scripture, of the practice of faith in the Christian church, okay? Is there a line? Can someone answer that one for me? And are you willing to operate outside of the government's mandates in order to continue in the practice of faith as you understand it, while loving your neighbor in every way you can?
That's a fair question. Taylor, you're wanted
Yes.
to get in. I don't know if you want to answer that or not, but you're welcome to jump in.
I mean, I have some other thoughts. I can wait, though, if someone wants to answer this question first.
Well, I'll respond to you, Jared. I think there's definitely a line. Oh my goodness, there's a line. I just don't see our public gatherings in the way that we see them today is a part of that line at all. There was a number of things I posted a few years ago, but there's like 7 or 8 things that I posted that the church pretends are biblical, but they really aren't. Like, we've canonized these things over the course of time. And I think mass gatherings is definitely one of those things. Gathering and communion and fellowship and those are things. That's something that I think is extremely important and is very biblical. But in terms of sitting in pews and being a part of a congregation of however many, I don't see that as being something that is to kind of die on that hill. But listen, if the government told me tomorrow that I could no longer practice faith or could no longer be a Christian, that would not stop me from practicing my faith, and I would die on that hill. But in terms of some of these things that I think we've potentially canonized over a course of time, and we, I'm not willing to hang my head on that to go against that, because I think God will be if we have a posture of submission because Jesus did this so well. He went against the things that he needed to go against, but he submitted to the things he needed to submit to. So if we do this well, we won't lose our witness when we do that. But when we stand on things that really don't change our faith, and we get ourselves in a lot of hot water. And I think James is onto something there, that if we stand on the authority of Scripture and say, yes, we have the right to do this, the rest of the community is going to come back and say, no, I don't see that. And they're going to think that we're more arrogant than anything else, probably. But at the end of the day, does this stop God from doing the miraculous? Like I've said that, like I've talked to several pastors in the last little while, and they've told me that they've seen new conversions. They've seen people give their heart to the Lord, not Sunday morning, but like throughout the week, or in different types of ministries, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's exciting. I mean, it's a little arrogant to us to think that COVID is going to stop God from doing amazing things. I mean, if anything, COVID is going to help us see that God's amazing, that God is continuing to do amazing things. And let's keep celebrating all the good things and seeing where God is taking this, because COVID is just an opportunity for God to show his greatness. That's really all this is. It's another crisis in our world, and God's ready to attack it and to take it on and show his light. And the church is there to say, hey guys, look at the light, right? Not hey guys, this is a problem. Hey guys, look at what God is doing. And I think we can do that as a church. I really do. And I think a lot of churches are doing it. And I think we need to celebrate it.
I'm just going to give a quick amen there to Andrew before Taylor comes back with her thoughts. We honestly, the incredible stories of the workings of the Holy Spirit. I think we've put a little too much authority on ourselves and on, our Sunday morning gatherings to think that the Holy Spirit cannot move without these structures and without our interaction with people. But I have heard so many incredible stories of the Holy Spirit prompting and leading and moving people, even when we weren't able to gather at all, just online. And so I think that we need to, also acknowledge that God's authority goes so far beyond what we are able to do in our own capacities. So, the workings of my hands on a Sunday morning, that's just a contributor to what the Holy Spirit does. And so I think that, amen, Andrew. Yeah, good words.
Amen, Andrew. Taylor.
We've talked a little bit about our posture toward, I guess, our theology, or how we operate during this season. And we've talked a bit about fear. We've talked a little bit about love. I think one of the most disheartening things that I guess I've seen throughout this pandemic is the posture of arrogance and the posture of just pride in the midst of it. And, whatever your theology lands on, we all hold the same central things. Jesus is Lord. We believe that he died on the cross, rose again. That doesn't change. And, whether we believe, that we should all get the vaccination or we don't, I've been so disheartened to see that this has divided the church in ways that it should never divide the church. And I'm saying this because I'm assuming most of the people listening are Christians, and I would caution us, because it breaks my heart. If you know me very much at all, I am very much the type that says we need to break down walls between denominations. We need to break walls down between churches. We need to be unified. I'm in a community of 4 small churches, and why are we standing up trying to do our own thing when we could just get together? But so unity is a huge thing for me, and it's probably one of the biggest pieces of theology, because I see people that are just allowing their view, whether it's to be double vaccinated or unvaccinated, to become not just a view that they hold, but to bring them to a place of arrogance and pride and superiority over the other camp. And it's polarized the church. And honestly, Scripture tells us, that it says in John 17, it says, Jesus is speaking, and he says, so that they may be brought to complete unity, and says, then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Our unity is a witness to the world. Our unity is a witness to those around us that don't know Jesus. So there's going to be this small percentage that may or may not come into your church, or not be allowed to come into your church. But there are hundreds and hundreds of people that don't know Jesus reading your Facebook posts, reading your comments, and seeing the way that you interact. And church, if we are interacting poorly, And I mean, the Lord knows we've all probably typed out some things on social media, and then the Holy Spirit was like, nope. And then we just delete them. You know, we've all had those situations. But I mean, if we're not careful about how we interact, those 2 or 3 people or one instance per church that might happen, that's really tough. But I think the way that we act, especially on social media, the way that we act when we talk about these polarized issues is going to break us far more than you know, the 1 or 2 examples in our province whereby option A or B have really caused major issues. Not that that's not important; it is important. But I think we need to realize the way that we talk to each other, the way that we operate, a posture of humility and like Andrew said, submission. That we need to have that posture, because if we don't, and we'll never know how big of a negative impact it had, but it's having a negative impact because it's making, you know, people who don't know Jesus say, well, basically, well, I don't want to know him anyway, because look at the crowd, that follow him. So, I mean, I think for me, that's the biggest piece. We need to be unified in the midst of this. And I've preached that to my church and really tried to make sure that my church is that way. And it's not always easy, but I think it's one of the most important things we can do if we want to show the love of Jesus in the midst of all of this.
So I wanted to do a couple of things with this tonight. I wanted to show some calm and thoughtful conversation about a very contentious topic. And I also wanted to show that we can have differing opinions on some things and do so with some respect. I like to model that. So to Taylor's point, and probably Andrew's before, I think however you've approached this from the church's perspective, I think how some believers have conducted ourselves has been of a greater detriment to the kingdom overall than whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, or you're blocking people at the doors, or you're welcoming everybody, lepers and all. I think our general reaction to the bit of pressure we've seen, and as you've heard me say here before, this is not as bad as it's going to get. Like, this is just a dry run for when things get really bad, and we never handled it well. Overall, most of us pivoted fairly quick, but throughout the church as a whole, there's been an awful lot more fear and hand wringing and then anger and reaction than probably we should have seen. And so this is a real chance for us to evaluate how we handled some pressure when things never went as normal and we're not getting our own way. We're considered non-essential, at least in our worship gatherings. And our response to this is very telling, because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So, yeah, let me see a few comments here. You're all hanging in there. We'll go another few minutes. Keith, can't believe some of you are so soft on this mandate. So many professionals around the world have refused. What about Newfoundland Pentecostal pastors? I don't, Keith, my friend, believe that it's being soft. I think our pastors are trying to do what's best for both their congregations and in terms of the community. I don't think it's just a matter of caving. I think, as you might have seen tonight, there are a couple of pretty significant perspectives here, and there's a couple of guiding principles that we're trying to follow, and one of them is love for community, love for each other, and love for the neighbor. And how do you best do that in the middle of a pandemic and public health guidelines? I don't think it's caving. I think it's trying to sort that out the smoothest way possible with the least amount of damage. Nathaniel says, James Lander, great point on Christian witness to the government, the community, and the community of faith. It should really matter to us. Jonathan Rogers, hope you're well, my friend. We are the most essential place people can go. We deal with mental health, addiction, homelessness, and sickness, and eternity. Christians, of course, would agree with you. Secular folks would not necessarily see it that way, of course, which will come as no surprise to you. There's an awful lot of comments here that are really, really long, which get a little difficult, folks, to put on the screen because, it's going to cover up all these nice folks' faces. Sabrina, do an episode on ecclesiology. That would be a good idea, actually. We may do that another time. What makes the church, and how do we understand the church? Back to David's lovely point he made earlier, which I received with tremendous respect. What David is saying, as I understand it, is that the modern model of everything hinging on 2 services on a Sunday is actually fairly foreign to the New Testament. So when I say there are theological implications, Dave is saying yes, but what we're doing now is so foreign to the New Testament model that the New Testament doesn't actually speak to it. The New Testament knows mostly house churches. The New Testament knows elders. The New Testament doesn't know a professionally trained clergy class like we have now. It has shepherds. And so that's why Dave is saying what he's saying. He's not just doing it to be crooked, because Dave is not like that. The challenge with that, David, is that while you're right, and I hate to say that, we are now in a system where for a couple or 300 years, we have approached our ecclesiology this way. And even though it has surely drifted from a New Testament model, we're stuck now. So our folks give tremendous credence to meeting twice on Sunday, and that because that's what we've been doing now basically since the Enlightenment. And given the importance, and we're not trying to downplay the importance of Sunday gatherings. We know they're important. All of us here have given our lives to that. So don't take that out of this. But what we are doing, a number of us, is pushing back against the idea that so much hinges on that hour and a half on Sunday morning, or 3 hours on Sunday night, depending on where you come from. But David, I'll toss this back to you. Given that this is where we now find ourselves, does it not seem to you a bit of a challenge biblically to turn somebody away from a gathering? I think that was the kind of the core of my point.
Yeah, I think it's always a challenge. That's always a fear, as I pointed out. I think whatever way you stand on this, nobody wants to turn anybody away. That's the bottom line. I think there's a misconception that the comment was pastors have gotten soft, and it's like, yeah, but do you know all pastors? Do you know the struggles they've gone through? Do you know the heartache that some of them have endured through this process? To sit up there and say, oh, well, pastors are soft. I mean, come on. I mean, you don't know that person from Adam. You don't know what their internal workings are. And I think the bottom line is, nobody wants to turn anybody away. And so I think what we're trying to wrestle with at this stage in our journey is to say that, we need to work with what is right now. And to the point, I'm going to add a little bit of fuel to the fire, if I may, historically speaking.
By all means.
There is no record of a building dedicated to Christian worship prior to 312 AD. No record, not even a hint of it. So where were they meeting? Where were they going? Well, they were meeting in catacombs, where people were buried. They were meeting in houses. They were meeting in warehouses. They were meeting just about everywhere and anywhere they could. And so I think even historically, New Testament aside, we have at least an understanding of the early church that became flexible to the waves of persecution, famine, and disease. And so in that process, they were probably trying to figure out the same questions we're trying to figure out today in terms of our ecclesiology. And I think to turn people away, again, that's all predicated on the fact that you would see the church as a central part of community and faith. And I don't want people to misunderstand me. I'm incredibly liturgical. If you understand who I am, and if you know anything about me, I'm probably more Anglican in my liturgy than I am Pentecostal in my liturgy.
Yes,
that's true.
A well-known and oft-lamented fact.
I mean, I love liturgy as much as the next guy. I mean, I went to Westminster Abbey and I could just sit there all day. That's who I am. So of course I really care about, liturgy and church and all of these things. Don't misunderstand me. But I do think that, turning people away, you're yes, okay. In some cases, you might turn somebody away from a church building, but you can never really turn somebody from God. I mean, in the sense that if somebody comes to my door on a Sunday morning and I'm a pastor, you know, I've got a choice to make and a decision to walk with them. I have to uphold the laws of the land on one hand, but I also have to uphold the fact that this person has come to me in faith and earnesty. I mean, if you can come to some sort of conclusion about that and say that is, you know, that decision is for everybody, good luck, because that's going to be highly contextual. Again, that's going to be depending on the person. It's going to be, you know, I understand that some pastors would let people in, and I can't blame them for that. I know some pastors who would let people and say, well, you know what? We're going to have to walk through this. Let me walk you to your car. Let me have a conversation with you and we'll talk about this. And yeah, in essence, they would effectively turn them away from the church building. But I don't blame them for that as well, because I think that they are trying in their best wisdom to make a decision. And so if we want to go at somebody for trying to make a really difficult decision, I mean, that says more about us than it does about the other person. Because I guarantee that anybody in that same situation would have to wrestle that. It's easy for us to say, no, well, I would do what's right and I would do what's that. It's like, yes, but then you add all sorts of pressures to being a pastor. You add your church board on top of that. You add denominational mandates on top of that. You add government mandates on top of that. These are pressure points. And so it's easy for us behind the camera to say they should do this and they should do that, because we don't have any pressure points. We don't have any responsibilities. But as soon as you add to that condition, your decision-making process is going to be affected, and it's going to change based on who you are in a certain context and location and situation. So I think that's why I'm kind of more along that line of it's highly contextual, and I really don't know if it's exactly turning people away from Christian worship or you know, salvation or anything like that. I don't think any pastor would do that personally, but
that's good, David. We're going to go another 15 minutes or so. Somebody jump in and tell us what you want to talk about.
I'm just kind of curious as to what authority people think pastors have in opposing the government. What do you think we're going to do, really? Like, this is what is mandated to us. This is what we're required to abide by in order to worship publicly. And, you know, we're not deciding the government guidelines in these moments. We haven't chosen masks for our congregation, so we haven't chosen the Vax Pass necessarily until December the 17th. And so we are functioning to the best of our ability in the society in the moment we find ourselves in history. I don't think the underground church has chosen to be the underground church, but they found a way to worship and serve. And so, you know, I just want people to know, like, we're not out there saying this is exactly what we wanted the church to come to. This is us trying to make the absolute best of a situation that we are currently in and try to find creative ways to serve our people and serve our communities in the middle of it. And so I find it kind of alarming that people think we have some great authority over our government in these moments, because we don't.
That's kind of true. Somebody else jump in then. But I mean, the fact is, if James decides next Sunday to say, well, shag this, we're just going to go do our own thing, then what's going to happen is James is going to end up on the news. He is going to get fined. And the next step that comes is public health is going to come in and shut his church down altogether. And James will earn the applause of some because he finally stood up to the big bad government. To what end? At the end of it, I mean, what's he accomplished? We've watched the national news and seen the fellows that have been charged and dragged into court. And I guess, yes, at some point there's value just in standing up and speaking your piece, but you really got to weigh out the value and the good to the kingdom of God.
Yeah, I just want to know who's going to pay my fine.
We'll do a GoFundMe, boy, for you.
I mean, sell off my motorcycle, I suppose. I don't know.
No, it's not that bad, James.
No, hopefully not. Can I just touch on the whole essential service bit? Because I know, Brad, first when that became an issue, you said, if we want ourselves to be labeled as essential service, we had better be an essential service.
Right.
And this is what it does come down to, because I think as the church, we have done ourselves such an injustice in our communities that we have come to the place where people don't see us as an essential service, at least our Sunday services. Okay. We can gripe all day long that we're an essential service, but the reality is the government and the community doesn't see us as an essential service because we haven't allowed ourselves to be such.
Right.
So that's one thing. That should be cause for alarm for us that we need to up our game a bit as the church. We need to earn the respect of our communities to be seen as essential in our communities. So that should be an eye-opener for us in this. And I think if we had a little bit more respect, well, some people would say, well, you're a church, you shouldn't have respect because the world is not supposed to like you anyway. But I think if we had a bit more respect in our communities and we were probably doing a bit more the work of Jesus, then we could probably be seen as a bit more essential. I mean, the church was pioneers in so many things when it comes to schools and medicine and all these types of things. And a lot of us we're just settling for church on Sundays now. Again, I don't want to keep hitting on that, but we've really got to up our game. The other part of this is, since COVID started, the church has been one of the biggest voices of negativity towards the government restrictions. And we've brought our eschatology into this, right? And we've talked about, the vaccine is the mark of the beast, or the passport is the mark of the beast, or it's leading up to the mark of the beast. And where are we getting, what's our credibility when it comes to these things? How are we going to expect the government to come alongside of us when we've got people in our pulpits that are telling people that this is the mark of the beast or these types of things? That stuff is not helping us.
Right.
And these are some of some of the internal things as the church that we need to kind of deal with if we want to kind of be freed from a lot of this stuff. Because I think we're in the situation that we're in as being labeled a non-essential service because of some of the things that we've said and done in the past.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Steve, you want to jump in?
Yeah, just two things. One, there is theological difficulties with this, but I mean, when hasn't there been about so many other things, right? So this is not, it's new territory in terms of the topic, but in terms of churches going through theological difficulties, this is not new. The other thing I think too that we need to be very careful of is how passionate we can be to talk about how we may feel excluded because of this. Yet churches have had a really bad history of excluding other communities and other people groups. And I'm sure a lot of those groups are saying, hello, for 10, 15 years now, you haven't welcomed me in your church. And it's almost like, are you getting a taste of your own medicine kind of thing? So I think we need to really be careful in how we present ourselves and communicate this, because we haven't been perfect in this when it has touched other people's lives and has dealt with other people in other situations. So I think we need to be really aware of that on that point as well, is that we've had a really bad history of this in other situations. And so we just got to be careful with our language and how we communicate this and how aggressive we can be with it. So
I think that's fair. Gina says we all have a voice, but very few have the guts to stand up for it. I don't think, Gina, it's just a matter of guts, first of all. And second of all, my sense is many of the people who are crying out for people to have the guts to stand up for it are not they themselves in the situation where they have to make the choice. In other words, it's easy for me to say that other people should have the guts to stand up for it when it's not my decision in particular. Jones, proud of you all to go public with your opinions. It's enlightening. Different viewpoints help us because nobody is an island on to ourselves. Wanda Goodyear's asked a good question. One of you may know the answer to. Is Newfoundland the only province where church is not considered essential? Or the worship gatherings of the church are not considered an essential service? Any of you know the answer to that question? I don't right off.
I know that New Brunswick also. I don't know any other provinces.
Okay.
There may be others, but.
Rebecca says, we in the U.S. have low-tech vaccination cards. There are people I've always held as disciplined and authentic believers who have obtained fake vaccination cards. What would your response be? My response would be that duplicity, which is what that is unbecoming generally in the life of the believer. And while the Bible, believe it or not, does give approval in a couple of cases to people who told lies, that'll come as news to some of you, the Hebrew midwives being a prime example. I'm not sure faking vaccination cards would earn God's approval at this point. And in general, Christians should present themselves as honestly as possible. Let me see. Keith says the Vax Pass is the prelude of things to come. That is screaming so loud. I think, Keith, you're right about that, which is why our response, not in terms of resisting or standing up, because I don't think it's just all about shaking our fist at the government or the denomination, but our response in terms of how highly emotive the conversation has been and how much fear and anger is involved in the conversation, I think is not going to serve us well when the things you speak of to come actually arrive. A couple of more. Yeah, Angie helps us with that. Thank you, Angie, for that. Yeah,
Brad, if I can add something to that too. We're not going to stop it. It's going to happen. So like, there are worse things to come, but whatever we do now is not going to stop that from happening. It only maybe our approach might help us in terms of the big stuff that's to come. But we're not going to stop the stuff to come. Yeah.
No, that's true. Tammy says, part of the problem, if this is all based in science, then why is there differences across provinces? The general answer to that, Tammy, is because different health authorities choose to take more or less risk. So basically, their thinking is the tighter you lock things down, the more, the less risk you expose everybody to, but the more you trample on folks' rights. So what the health authorities are trying to do is balance public health with our freedoms of movement and worship and these other things. So some jurisdictions, you can see this play out across Canada and the US, are willing to impose more restrictions. The theory is to make their population safer and expose to less risk. Others are saying we would rather our populations had more freedom, but we are then naturally, theoretically, exposed to more risk medically. So that's the continuum. That's why you'll see different provinces and different states varying on that. Folks, we got time for another comment or two. If any of you have anything burning on your heart, a last minute testimony, I don't want you to go home and say that the devil had the victory because you never said what you wanted to say tonight in the testimony meeting. Anything, I'll read this to you while one of you is thinking about a comment. Marilyn, hi Marilyn. Being an active pastor in a church in the current situation isn't easy. Pulpit ministry isn't easy in the best of circumstances, adding a pandemic and government mandates on top of that, and it's a whole new bunch of stresses. My comment tonight isn't about what I consider to be right or wrong, but in this, I want you to all know you have my prayerful support. God called you, and he still equips you even in a pandemic. Thank you so much, Marilyn, for that. Any last thoughts? Jared.
I might be a bit outspoken specifically in this context, but I do need you all to know, specifically in this panel, I want to thank you for continually presenting the gospel and continually putting down to the core of representing Christ in love and in humility and in a proper posture. And however I might present might be unique or different than what we might get along with. I'm grateful for your witness. And I want you to know that on this particular issue, it's not a mountain, it's a molehill. This is not a hill I'm going to die on a vaccine passport or a Sunday morning gathering in particular. That's not it. If the gospel is still preached and it happens to be on YouTube if we can still find a way in your creative means, 100% wholeheartedly agree and are trying to employ it. Like, this is not the be all end all for me for Sunday mornings. In principle, the only thing I just wanted to leave on is how we are privileged for us who've been introduced to faith already, and in a country that I think Danny Soda was on this panel not too long ago, Dr. Noel, and he had said that these discussions is a privilege in times of peace. If this was a different context, if this was a war, and there's a number of comments in the feed that talk about third world countries or Christians that are hidden in underground churches, like this wouldn't even be a thought to them. In the times that it is, regardless if you agree or disagree with either of us, and that's not what we're trying to pull you on any side of a polarizing argument. The point is we're trying to point you back to representing Jesus in a context that none of us have dealt with before. Everyone is going to approach this with the best of their convictions, with the best of their ability, following after the Spirit as he leads them in context, and it may look different in two different places. But it is the same Spirit that leads us. Taylor nailed it with what unites us. And I'm asking you to pray for those, specifically if you disagree with them, and not only for those you disagree with. I got real convicted last week. I got a chance to preach at a James 4. And we've said it in church, you have not because you ask not. And we say it as if you can ask for healing and it'll be right there, fine. But the rest of the context is if you ask incorrectly because you want to spend it on your pleasures. If at the end of the day, the argument I'm making is so that I can come back to comfort, like James was talking about earlier. If all I want is to get back to church the way that I was used to it, then I am only going to get the bare minimum of any picture of God's blessing, because he is doing a new thing. This is one of the great examples. We've got a panel of hundreds of people that are watching, 8 churches or 8 different disciplines represented, trying to reach out in one province that we've never done this before, but God is doing something amazing. And I'm grateful for each and every one of you and all of your influence in challenging me to do better, to go further, to seek more aptly after the Spirit. You're rock stars, and I love you.
I'm a lot of things, Jared, but I'm not a rock star. Anybody else? We good?
I just wanted to say one thing about all the pastors watching. I'm not in full-time ministry right now, but I've had numerous conversations with a lot of lead pastors in the last little while, and the amount of stress that's amongst them right now is incredible. And I just want to say that I've been praying for you all, and I know the weight of leading a church, and I know that it's a very strange weight. And so I do want to say that it's been on my heart for the last year or so that all these lead pastors are experiencing new levels of stress they've never experienced before, and you are in my prayers, and I hope that this is behind us soon enough. But God can still do amazing things, and He is still doing amazing things. So keep up the good work, and it will be for His glory.
I want to add to what Andrew is saying, and the last 2 weeks I've been in 3 different Tim Hortons meeting with people, and I've not once been carded with the Vax Pass, and that's frustrating to me because I know and I see pastors who are experiencing the very same reality. The government says you're supposed to go into a restaurant, you're supposed to do all of these things. And these establishments aren't even doing their best to live up to the law. And so I understand how frustrating that is. My wife is in youth ministry. And when we understood that, that those 12 and up couldn't be in on a Sunday morning because of the whole Vax Pass issue, that's frustrating. That's a hurdle. That's a challenge. And that gets under your skin. So, I want to convey that if you're a pastor here listening tonight, and I was in ministry, I'm not in now, but I do know the frustration that you experience, the contradictions all around us in our society when people and businesses don't live up to the standards that the church is choosing to implement in their own house. And I get that frustration, and I got no words other than praying for you. And I'm here to support you no matter what I can do technically or whatever. So anyways.
Thank you, folks. Lots of appreciation for the panel tonight. Jamie wants you to know, if you can drink Tim's regularly, COVID will never hurt you. I think there's some wisdom there in Jamie's words, as much as it pains me to say it. Thank you, folks. I want you to know as well that I got your back, as you may know already. What you do is very, very difficult, but is, in my mind, of course, essential. And I know that you are some of the best minds and creative souls that the province has to offer in all of your different areas. So I wish you a Godspeed, and I hope you get some rest. And I hope you, if you haven't figured out already how to pace yourself in this and take care of yourself, you should figure out how to do it before tomorrow morning, because my sense is we're going to be at this all of next year. So, yeah, make sure you do take care of yourselves and you get yourselves some rest and learn how to draw on the deep wells, because you're going to need the deep wells to get through these next 12 months for sure. Because then when everything goes back to so-called normal, people are going to expect you to be firing on all cylinders for absolute certain. So to Crystal and Jared and David and Steve and James and Taylor and Andrew, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I like doing panels. I like hearing other voices. And folks, you should have heard the hearts of some pastors here and leaders. You should have heard how complex it is. You should have heard the various principles that we're trying to wrestle through. These folks are not weak. These folks don't lack voice. They don't lack conviction. They are doing their best to navigate this as biblically as possible. That's what you should have seen and heard. And dealing with COVID as a pastor doesn't come with a manual. So we're figuring this out as we go. Thank you all. The Lord bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you, as I'm sure it has already. Peace out. Thank you, folks. Lots of comments. We appreciate you all being on again tonight. I won't be on next week. I'm not sure if I'm coming back before Christmas, but I may do one more. Take care of yourselves, and I hope you appreciated this. I hope you found it informative. Lord bless you all. Have a real good week, and take care.